Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin Sunday. Thank you for being here. You know, when I was growing up, it wasn't that long ago, but long enough, I really looked forward to television on Saturdays and Sundays, particularly in the evening. I was glued to the screen watching a firing line with the great Bill Buckley, or even PBS from time to time, particularly when they ran a series, Free to Choose, based on Milton Friedman's book. We were introduced to great men, Mises, Sol, Hayek, so many others, Ronald Reagan. I miss that today. I really do. TV has changed a lot. We have a conga line of guests, boom, 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 boom. And that's okay. But I try to do this program a little differently. Slow things down, think about it, dig a little more deeply, even go into some of the great philosophers and writers and so forth. And we have two of those great guests this evening. We have Victor Davis Hanson and Newt Gingrich. It'll be a smart show, not because of me, because of them. But I do want to dig deeply. When you look at what's happened to our justice system and the law, how it's being used against President Trump, how it's being distorted at every level, local, state, and federal, civil and criminal. And when you look at how the media are all supportive, when you look at how there are mobs and factions of citizens who think this is fantastic, and when you look at the Oval Office and Joe Biden, who's behind the scenes and actually out front now encouraging this sort of thing and trying to take Trump off ballots, trying to rush the appellate process, destroying due process and attorney-client privilege and all these other things, it smells to me like the French Revolution. Just have a phony Tron, get him to the guillotine as fast as you can, because we have a country to destroy. We know what's best. We want one-party rule, and we're going to get there by hook or by crook. So I got to think of a book that was one of Ronald Reagan's favorite, certainly one of mine, by a man named Frederick Bastiat. It's called The Law. Frederick Bastiat was born in 1801, and he died in 1850, a very young man. He worked in the French legislature, and he saw his country destroying itself, moving towards socialism, and he said, which means it will eventually move towards communism. Individual liberty, private property rights, the whole rule of law is being destroyed, he said, right in front of our eyes. That's exactly what's taking place in this country today, exactly. That horrendous State of the Union address, the constant coverage of these outrageous rogue prosecutors, all Democrats, these rogue Democrat judges appointed by Obama and Biden, one after another, some of them elected locally in our inner cities by Democrats, all aimed at taking out a man who disagrees with them. I want to read you a little bit of this, and then I want to encourage you to pursue it further on your own. It's called The Law. Bastiat says, unfortunately, law by no means confines itself to proper functions. And when it has exceeded its proper functions, it is not done so merely in some inconsequential and debatable matters. The law has gone further than this. It has acted in direct opposition to its own purpose. These are profound words. The law has been used to destroy its own objective. It has been applied to annihilating the justice that it was supposed to maintain, to limiting and destroying rights, which its real purpose was to respect. The law has placed the collective force at the disposal of the unscrupulous who wish, without risk, to exploit the person, liberty, and property of others. It has converted plunder into a right in order to protect plunder, and it has converted lawful defense into a crime in order to punish lawful defense. How has this perversion of the law been accomplished, and what has been the results? And he was looking at his country, the influence that Marx was having on his country and throughout Europe. He said, there's also a tendency that is common among people. When they can, they wish to live and prosper at the expense of others. This is no rash accusation, nor does it come from a gloomy and uncharitable spirit. The annals of history bear witness to the truth of it. The incessant wars, mass migrations, religious persecutions, universal slavery, dishonesty in commerce, and monopolies. This fatal desire has its origin in the very nature of man, in that primitive, universal, and insuppressible instinct that impels him to satisfy his desires with the least possible pain. Men naturally rebel against the injustice of which they are the victims. Thus, when plunder is organized, he doesn't just mean financial and economic plunder. He means when you plunder the liberty of somebody. Plunder in its fullest sense. Thus, when plunder is organized by law for the profit of those who make the law, all the plundered classes try somehow to enter by peaceful or revolutionary means into making the law. So his point is, it starts with a few, but then everyone wants a piece of the action. Everybody wants a piece of the pie. According to their degree of enlightenment, these plundered classes may propose one of two entirely different purposes when they attempt to attain political power. Either they may wish to stop lawful plunder, or they may wish to share in it. Stop it or share in it. Woe to the nation when the latter purpose prevails among the mass victims of lawful plunder, when they, in turn, seize power to make the law. He's basically saying, now everybody's in on it, which destroys the law, justice, liberty, and the civil society. Until that happens, the few practice lawful plunder among the many. A common practice where the right to participate in the making of law is limited to a few persons. But then participation in making of the law becomes universal. This is why Thomas Jefferson said you can have tyranny in many forms, including, he said, tyranny of the legislature. If they don't comply with their oath and follow the Constitution and the limits placed on them, they're tyrannical. Just because you vote for them doesn't mean they're not. And then men seek to balance their conflicting interests by universal plunder. That's what I'm describing. Instead of rooting out the injustices found in society, they make these injustices general. As soon as the plundered classes gain political power, they establish a system of reprisals against other classes. It's exactly what's going on against Trump and his supporters right now. They do not abolish legal plunder. This objective would demand more enlightenment than they possess. Instead, they emulate their evil predecessors by participating in this legal plunder, even though it is against their own interests. What he's saying there is, do you understand, in America, when you destroy your Constitution, when you destroy the Bill of Rights, when you destroy due process, the whole purpose of a trial, when you eliminate attorney-client privilege, when you target a single man in order to destroy him by hook or by crook with 91 felony charges from the Ku Klux Klan Act to federal elections, to the Enron obstruction, to documents. Do you understand that you've destroyed the very foundation of the law and justice that is supposed to protect you? You think you perpetrators are going to be unaffected by this? That's what he's saying. It's impossible to introduce into society, he says, a greater change and a greater evil than this: the conversion of the law into an instrument of plunder. In the first place, it erases from everyone's conscience the distinction between justice and law. Again, think of what they're doing to Trump. No society can exist unless the laws are respected to a certain degree. The safest way to make laws respected is to make them respectable. When law and morality contradict each other, the citizen has the cruel alternative of either losing his moral sense or losing his respect for the law, which is what's happening in this country. The two evils are of equal consequence, and it would be difficult for a person to choose between them. The nature of law is to maintain justice. This is so much the case that in the minds of the people, law and justice are one of the same thing. There is in all of us a strong disposition to believe that anything lawful is also legitimate. This belief is so widespread that many persons have erroneously held that things are just because the law makes them so. Thus, in order to make plunder appear just, plunder again beyond property, the plundering of the law, the plundering of the justice system, that is, in order to make plunder appear justice and sacred to many consciences, it is only necessary for the law to decree and sanction it. And you hear it today. You're not above the law. Wait a minute. The law is an ass. The way you're using it, rewriting it, changing it. No. It's just because it's the law. And it's just because the government's using it. And it's just because the prosecutors are bringing it. And it's just because the judges are supporting it. It's just because we're going to have a trial. We're going to have a jury. He's saying, no, it's not. It's plunder. You're dressing it up. as justice. If you suggest a doubt as to the morality of these institutions, it is boldly said that you are a dangerous innovator, a utopian, a theorist, a subversive. You would shatter the foundations upon which society rests. Hence, Trump is Hitler. Trump's going to be a dictator. Trump is going to put people in prison. It's Trump, Trump, Trump. This man was a genius, but he saw this going on in France. This is going on right now in the United States of America. Thus, he says, if there exists a law which sanctions slavery or monopoly, oppression or robbery, in any form whatever, it must not ever be mentioned. For how can it be mentioned without damaging the respect which it inspires now? Still further, morality and political economy must be taught from the point of view of this law, now this perverse, bastardized law, from the supposition that it must be a just law merely because it is a law. This is profoundly important to help explain what's taking place in this nation. People are being told that what's being done to Donald Trump is just. No, it's not. It's the criminalization of politics by the perversion of the law. Oh, no, you don't understand. We've heard it from leftists all over. We've heard it from people here who are liberal on different panels, and so he's been charged 91 times. You're telling me he's not going to be convicted of something? Bastiat answers this. This is immoral. This is perverse. This is the destruction of your lawful society. And of course, it's going to devour all of us, because no longer are the people who make the law just. No longer are the people who make the law and execute the law just. No longer are the consequences of the law just. This could apply to what would come later, the Soviet Union, to communist China, communist Cuba, to Islamist Iran, and on and on and on. But the problem is it's applying to our country. Just step back and think about it. Are we really willing to accept a Democrat administration with Democrat prosecutors and Democrat judges imprisoning the former president of the United States, perhaps imprisoning him before the election? Is that what this has come to? This is the definition of the Democrat Party. Lawless, dictatorial. They want a one-party state. This is the undoing of the American system. Now you know why I used to like those older shows and the hosts and how they went about explaining things and how they would talk about things like the law by Frederick Bastiat. I'll be right back. Welcome back, America. Another very smart man, our buddy Newt Gingrich, who used to sit back there as speaker and watch presidents speak. I'm sure this time it would have been very difficult. It was a grueling, exhausting speech, not for Biden, but for the rest of us. You know, Newt, it's been 3 days since he gave the speech. I think it'll go down in history, if it goes down at all, as the worst State of the Union speech in history. But I want to get a little beyond that. I watched this speech. It's very upsetting, very frustrating, the serial lies and distractions and all the rest. But I started really taking a measure of this man, Joe Biden. You know, he's been around a long time. We've been around a long time. We think we know who he is. But the extent at his core and his soul of who he really is, I thought came out big time during the course of that speech. When you watch that speech, surely in your mind you were thinking similarly, what am I dealing with here? What are we as a nation dealing with? What were your thoughts?
To have somebody who is such a vicious, dishonest liar standing in front of you and know that you can't get up and jump him, you can't hit him in the back of the head. And I thought Johnson, he would not know, he would laugh at things that were absurd. So I want to give him some credit here. I wasn't surprised. I have for a long time concluded that Joe Biden is a dishonest, lying, corrupt person who has no regard for his own country, who is pathetic in his inability to protect America anywhere in the world, and who, frankly, I think is rapidly going to become maybe the second worst president in American history. And I think that it's just astonishing to watch him. But I thought the speech the other night was beyond the pale. I went back and read Harry Truman's 1948 State of the Union. It is patriotic, unifying, visionary. The comparison, because Truman's clearly their model, and Truman in September and October was very partisan. But in January and February, he was the president of the whole country. What we saw, I think, the other night was we don't have a commander-in-chief. We have a Democrat-in-chief. We don't have a president. We have a chairman of the Democratic National Committee. And I think it is a disgraceful performance.
And of course, he's celebrated in the Democrat Party media, but not by very many other people. Do you think this is a consequence of him and half a century of him? Or do you think, because he's so chameleon-like, that it's really the Democrat Party and the radical elements of the Democrat Party that are leading this direction, or is it him that's leading the party?
No, I mean, I think he's sort of evolved this way, but it's also that he's surrounded now. Think of this as the third Barack Obama term. He's surrounded by left-wingers. They have a worldview that is radically different than us. You know, you really have in this country today two alternative realities. You have a group of people who believe that if you bribe the Iranians and you abandon Israel and you accept, people can have 297 different sexual identities, etc., then you're a good person. They believe that. I mean, you have to at least give them credit that they are genuinely weird and that they are sincerely weird. Biden has decided that he's part of the weirdness and that therefore it has to be good because he's for it. But this is, in fact, probably the most corrupt man ever to be president. He's a man who is a serial liar. He's closer to the Sopranos than he is to a normal American president. They accomplished two things, I have to be in all honesty. They proved he could, in fact, speak energetically for over an hour and I thought pretty intelligently, drift out of the House chambers slowly, proving he had enough extra energy, enough ability to engage. So they got that out of the way. Second, they destroyed any effort to get him off the ticket. If you watch the number of Democrats jumping up yelling 4 more years, there's not going to be any effort to dump Joe Biden. So at one level, if I were Donald Trump, I'd feel this was a pretty good speech because he just locked down that he is going to be the Democratic nominee. And as the New York Times reported last Sunday, and what I thought was an amazing article, their chief analyst, Nate Cohen, said, people just don't like Biden. That's his biggest problem.
Well, what's to like? I mean, his personality is horrendous. What's to like? The way he speaks and the way he attacks people? Let me ask you this. You said he's the second worst president ever. Who's the first? I can think of Buchanan. I can think of Woodrow Wilson. Who would you say is the worst?
I think you have to say Buchanan because he allowed the South to seize all the federal arsenals, and he allowed the concept of secession to grow under his presidency. An aggressive, if you go back and look at how Andrew Jackson, a generation earlier, handled the idea of secession, and he was going to mobilize the Army and South Carolina back down. Had we had an Andrew Jackson in the 1850s, we probably wouldn't have had a civil war.
Of course, the Democrats hate Andrew Jackson, too, even though he was a Democrat. Let me ask you this about Joe Biden. Joe Biden threw in with the worst racist segregationist senators imaginable. Eastland, Stennis, Talmadge, Byrd, when he came into the Senate. He was not just the young, sophomore coming into the Senate or junior coming into the freshman. He was a leader, and he wrote legislation, and he got Eastland to back it to oppose integration and so forth and so on. Now he walks around like he's the great hope. He's the savior of democracy. How dare you challenge him and challenge his viewpoints and so forth. How does he get away with this transition from one of the big-time segregationist racists 50 years ago to really pretending to be the great hope?
Well, first of all, remember that Delaware 50 years ago was a dramatically more conservative and more southern state. It was actually more sympathetic to Jesse Helms than it was to John Lewis. Second, you cannot overstate the importance of the elite news media. They're going to cover Biden. They're going to protect Biden. They're going to defend Biden. They hate Trump so deeply that no matter what Biden does, they're going to prop him up because he's the only hope they have of stopping Trump from getting to be president again. And the prospect of a Trump presidency is so terrifying if you are in the news media that anything you can do, no matter how big the lie, anything you can do counts. You may remember that in the 1930s, the New York Times won a Pulitzer Prize for a correspondent in Moscow who explicitly, deliberately lied about Stalin, refused to report on the famine that killed 10 million people in Ukraine, and was generally a despicable person. Got a Pulitzer Prize. Well, the same thing's going on here. This is comparable to the degree to which they lied about Castro and the degree to which they lied about Stalin. And all of the elite media has joined the New York Times in a conspiracy of dishonesty, trying to prop up Biden and, more importantly, trying to stop Donald Trump.
Victor Davis Hanson, I have enormous admiration for. And Victor's at the Hoover Institution. He's a senior fellow, among other things. Victor Davis Hanson, even though the speech was very forgettable, it'll go down in history as a footnote to a footnote on what presidents shouldn't say. I still want your take on it since I haven't heard. What did you make of the Biden speech?
Well, he only becomes animated and angry, when he's talking about his own domestic opposition, his fellow Americans. In other words, he doesn't show that level of invective or slander or smears when he's talking about the Houthis or the Iranians or the Russians or the Chinese. So he comes alive so he has a deep loathing for half the country because he mischaracterizes them. Almost every issue that he brought up, Mark, whether it was the deficit or crime or the border, was what he said was not true. And he knew what he said was not true, but he felt that if he was animated enough and angry enough, then the media and his supporters would think, well, at least he's animated. So I thought it was a very poor speech. There were some really bad scenes in it when he personally attacked the Supreme Court justices in the chambers of the Congress, or when he talked about people not paying their fair share of taxes when his own son has now been charged with tax evasion and avoidance, and he just got a check that said loan repayment that was an obvious mechanism to dodge federal taxes. So I thought it was a disaster myself, and I hope it's not a precedent that you use these occasions to attack and smear and mischaracterize half the country.